You're listening to HBCU Pulse Radio on Sirius XM Channel 142 HBCU. You're now locked in to HBCU Pulse. We are the #1 outlet for HBCU life, talking about everything that's important to our culture, from on-campus issues to politics and what's trending on the yard. We always keep that same energy. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to HBCU Pulse Radio. You're listening to the HBCU Sports Playbook on HBCU Pulse Radio.
What's going on, everybody? This is Randall Barnes, the founder of HBCU Pulse and the host of HBCU Pulse Radio, in the building for another special edition of the show on today, where we are unfortunately talking about the NFL draft and the lack of HBCU players drafted. And also we're going to celebrate Isaiah Bolden, who was the only HBCU player drafted to the NFL, and talk about the HBCU prospects that made it on a team. We have Arielle in the building, our football extraordinaire. How you doing today, Arielle?
Doing pretty good. It's good to talk about football on a Sunday, but just not this particular topic. Slightly disappointed.
It definitely is disappointing. And we are recording this the day after the final rounds of the NFL draft. And I'm not even gonna lie, I am shocked, surprised, because I was told that there is a bunch of visibility that came to HBCU football and there were gonna be players that were drafted, and that didn't happen. But we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. But Arielle, just to start off, you saw one player drafted, Isaiah Bolden, out of Jackson State University. He was taken by the New England Patriots. He's gonna be on that defense with Bill Belichick. So how do you feel about only one HBCU player getting drafted?
I think it's really disappointing because, like you said, we saw so many people that had came in, and even two prospects, Mark Evans II, and then you saw Isaiah Land. And it's like the two prospects that were invited, despite all the really big talent, and you could see that in this draft, they were either looking for offensive tackles, they were looking for people to come off the edge, they were looking for a lot of DBs, defensive ends, and HBCU players, they gave that. That was most who enter into the draft, and only one of them to be picked for the New England Patriots in the 7th round. It's disappointing to me. All this talent, all the built, and all the hype, and we only see one player taken off the board. It's very disappointing. This to me, this just seems like we're going backwards. I believe literally just last year we had 4 players. So what was the problem this year? That the players that came in that were really, really good just weren't good enough.
I think just for me, like, my reaction was, like I said, I was disappointed. And I think the part that was the most disappointing is the fact that there was a lot of talent in this draft. And I go back to what you said last episode about this being like the most talented pool of HBCU prospects that we've seen in a long time. I mean, having Mark Evans and Isaiah Land and Xavier Smith, that's been getting so much hype, for them not to get picked up, only one player. Like, I think that there was a lot of talent, but I think it goes a little bit further than even the talent. I think it really is the perspective of the NFL when it comes to how they view D2 and FCS talent, especially HBCU talent. So I want to ask you this, Arielle. Do you think that, like, if Isaiah Land went to Florida or Mark Evans went to Arkansas, do you think that maybe with the numbers that they put up this year for FAMU and University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff respectively, do you think if they went to an FBS school, they would have been drafted?
Oh, they definitely would have been drafted. If 2 Iowa players can be drafted, then yes, if they would have went to Florida or the Big 3, if they would have went to Georgia, Alabama, or Ohio State, then they would have been automatically in there. But it shouldn't take us going to these other institutions. And I don't think any player, no matter where they go, should be penalized and not seen for the talent that they distribute. Xavier Smith is amazing. Mark Evans II is amazing. All these players are amazing. It's disappointing at the end of the day. Like, there's no words that can describe the actions that the NFL took to just only see one player come off the board.
I totally agree. And what I'll say is this: I think that the bigger problem with HBCU players not getting drafted, that I think that a lot of folks on social media, a lot of the prognosticators in our space aren't talking about, is the mindset. Because many people think the FCS football, and like I said, especially HBCU football and throwing D2 football in there, is less than. And I think the GMs and the scouts are only willing to do their due diligence on FBS players because of the name. And I think that's so ingrained in the sports industry when it comes to football to downplay FCS, to downplay Division II as lower than and less than FBS, that it has to be ingrained in scouts and general managers' mind that, man, he went to an FCS school, he went to an HBCU. We're not going to draft this player because we're going to get this player that was not as good from Alabama, that was not as good from Iowa because of the name brand, and they're not willing to put their name on it because they feel as if that HBCU player or that North Dakota State player then pan out, I'm going to get fired. Like, I really think that is the big problem. The mindset is the biggest problem. But let's really get even deeper into what we believe the problem is. Do you believe that if we play maybe more out-of-conference games, more money games, we'll see more players drafted?
I don't think we win in a situation like that. Like, on one hand, some people are probably thinking like, oh, if we play all these bigger schools, like we decide to do what Tennessee State is trying to do in the next 2 years and play those really big teams like North Dakota State, we're talking about an HBCU team that either has to live up to those standards or try to recruit more or be faced with a very embarrassing defeat. Like, I don't see how playing a bigger team is ever going to help an HBCU build on the confidence, build on the structure, or even find some type of exposure. Like, we'll get exposure, but exposure to be laughed at, exposure to be downgraded, exposure to be looked at. Why did they even do that? Because why put an HBCU team that probably doesn't have the resources, that maybe isn't there coaching-wise, that maybe isn't there talent-wise, try to force them to move up, but they don't even have the resources to even do that. The resources to even come out and maybe even score a touchdown within the first half, let alone the first quarter. So I don't really see a big upside of me trying to be like, all right, A&T, let's go play the University of North Carolina on our first game. Let's go play Wake Forest. Let's go play Duke and all of them. And then just get our butt whooped. And then it's like, oh, they wanted more exposure. I don't want our teams or our players to be looked at that way. I want them to come when we have these classics. I don't see the point of us trying to play bigger and better teams with the resources that we have. And I don't think that should be our only option. Just come to us. Like, there's talent out there. There's no reason why you should look down on us.
I totally agree with you. And it's so funny because I keep hearing that Kobe Durant got drafted last year because he got those 2 picks against Clemson, which is amazing. And I understand that. But when we look at the fact that there was one D2 player that was drafted, it was a player from Wingate. You had a player from Wingate that was drafted that was a punter. And when you look at their schedule, and even you look at last year with Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State, who won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. We talk about, oh, well, with their TV games, did they play bigger schools? You have D2 schools that are playing FCS schools. Are they getting exposure there? Joshua Williams, the only out-of-conference non-HBCU game that Fayetteville State played in 2021 was against Wingate, and they lost to Wingate. And you have a Wingate player that gets drafted, that's a punter. I just don't get it, like the whole entire exposure thing. Then even looking at the HBCU football TV viewership that we reported on HBCUPulse.com, 2022 Celebration Bowl, 2,407,000 viewers. You had all of these different games from the MEX-WAC Challenge to the Celebration Bowl. They range between 200,000 views and 2 million views. Like, that's the part I'm not really understanding, because we're getting the media attention. We're getting the slots on ESPN. We're back on NBC with the Bayou Classic. So, like, that's the part I'm not understanding, is what does exposure really mean? It was a lot of people that were hopping on the Deion Sanders left, so that's why HBCU players weren't drafted. And Arielle, you don't know this, I had someone tweet at me that this is karma. Only one HBCU player being drafted is karma because of how all of y'all trashed Deion Sanders when he was leaving to go to Colorado. So I'm like, you know what? Let me not respond emotionally. Let me go to the facts, because we wrote an article on HBCUPulse.com where we listed every HBCU player drafted to the NFL, and we put Isaiah Bolden on that list. It was pretty easy. So when you look at the list, and I'm going to read off the different years and the players that were drafted each year. So you have 4 players drafted in 2011, 2015, 2017, 2019, including Titus Howard being drafted in the first round out of Alabama State in 2019. You had 3 players in 2016 and 2018. You had 2 in 2010, 2013, and 2014, and 1 in 2012 and 2020. My thing is this: Deion Sanders was not around long enough to change that trend, because as you can see, he only got 2 players drafted. Now, he did produce professionals. You have James Houston. You have Art Miller that was signed. You have Dallas Daniels that was signed. You have different players that played under him that are in the NFL. That is great. And he did bring exposure to Jackson State and incidentally HBCUs. There was renewed interest around HBCU football. But the Deion Sanders effect is just that. It is the promotion. It is, hey, Deion is in this space, so let me tune in to the Orange Blossom Classic. Oh, Xavier Smith is really good. That is what that is. This whole entire notion that, number one, he brought people to watch HBCU football in general when the viewing numbers were consistent. There were bumps here and there, but the viewership numbers were consistent. And then also, we saw 4 HBCU players drafted in 2022. You also saw it for 4 different years in the 2010s. He got 2. And then he tweets this. He says he's ashamed of the 31 other NFL teams that couldn't find draft value in all the talented HBCU players. And we had 3 more worthy players at JSU that should have been drafted. I just think that we have to have the real conversation about the Deion Sanders effect and the fact that he wasn't around long enough to do anything.
It bothers me to want to try to even tie him to this draft. You obviously can't, because you can't say he didn't, because it's his player. The only player that was drafted came from the school that he just left, but he wasn't there long enough, and it speaks to what his presence could have been and the potential it could have grown to, because you only stayed there for 2.5 years. People would like to say 3. And after you leave, you only have 1 person under your coaching. It doesn't make any sense.
And the crazy part about it is that folks are trying to spin this into a win for Deion Sanders. And I think that it is also an indictment that he's only had 2 players that were drafted. And you watch the Coach Prime documentary, and he had all those scouts walking around. He had all 30 teams that showed up at Jackson State, and you see him with his arms crossed and his whistle and all the different stuff. And he's talking to these scouts, but only 2 players were drafted. I just think that speaks volumes. Before we move on, I want to say that there were 10 FCS players in general, like I said, drafted out of the 259 total players out of all the rounds. Only 1 HBCU player, Isaiah Bolden. And if you look at the number of FCS players that were drafted to the NFL over the last decade, you had 2014, 19, and then 2016 was 20, so it peaked there. And then 2021, you had 5 players, 2020, 6 players. So I think that this is definitely an HBCU issue, and we get the worst of it. I think NFL executives and scouts need to understand that there's talent at every level of college football. But let's not be so doom and gloom, because we do have some players that were picked up in undrafted free agency and that also were drafted. So let's start with showing love to Isaiah Bolden. He was drafted to the New England Patriots out there with Bill Belichick. So Isaiah Bolden had a really great career and a really great season. He's a kick returner, and also he's a defensive back. He had 44 total tackles, 7 pass breakups. As a kick returner, he had 10 attempts, 260 yards. He had 36.9 yards per kick return. His longest return was 55 yards. So I want you to just give me your rundown. Do you think that Isaiah Bolden is going to be productive on the next level in NFL?
Out of all the games that were played last year, 20 and 30% of the games were won just because of a kick return that happened. So kick returning, punt returning is going to be one of your main go-tos, or something that you look for in a player just in case a game is on the line. So to get Isaiah Bolden, I'm actually very happy. I think the Patriots, and trying to rebuild the team that they have after not having Tom Brady, and Bill Belichick's resume is kind of on the line. And it's not saying that their quarterback isn't great. I used to rave about him, and I still think that he has the potential to grow into a really, really great quarterback for Bill Belichick. But I think this is one of the additions that they actually needed to put somebody at the end of the field. This man is super fast. That's the one thing I can say about Isaiah Bolden. It's just natural to him that I know is going to help the Patriots. And then if you don't want him as a kick returner, I think putting him in the slot, or, maybe having him in and out as a tight end isn't bad either. Just an extra boost of speed playing on the offense. But other than that, I think this is a good fit for them. I think it's a good way to bring out another threat on the Patriots. And I'm excited, and congratulations to him. I cannot wait to see what he does, and I cannot wait to see him on the field, to see what their summer practices are looking like. And then we get into preseason, and then finally, I know he's going to get used, because in that one position, I know that the Patriots want to turn around and try to show off within their first 3 games that, hey, this is a new dominant Patriots team that everybody is used to seeing because the Patriots have created that type of persona. But I know he'll definitely get used. I definitely know he'll get playing time. And the speed and the effort that he's going to put, especially being the only HBCU player, so more than just one person like me can go through the draft and actually get their name called, I think it's a big weight. So he has a lot of responsibility this season, but I know he can carry it. And again, congrats to him. It's a great addition by the Patriots.
Yes, big congratulations to him. And you said he was really fast. He timed at a 4.33 in the 40-yard dash. It's pretty quick. So let's talk about the undrafted free agents. So on HBCUPulse.com, we have an updated list of the undrafted HBCU free agents. We have the full list out and we're updating it as things happen. As we're recording this right now, Kamari Everett has not been picked up. So that's been interesting. So we're going to see where he goes, because he definitely should be picked up. But you have Aubrey Miller that's going to the Miami Dolphins out of Jackson State. You have Isaiah Land, who was one of the bigger names that are being talked about leading into the NFL drafts. He's going to the Dallas Cowboys out of FAMU with this guy, Marquise Bell, who was also undrafted and was a big impact on the Dallas Cowboys having a really great season until they flamed out in the second round. We always got to say that. You have Mark Evans II going to the New Orleans Saints out of University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. You raved about him on the last episode, Arielle. You have Emmanuel Wilson, my dog there, hey, Fort Valley. He's going to the Denver Broncos. And also you have Xavier Smith, Los Angeles Rams out of FAMU. Hey, he's up there with Jacoby Durant. And also Shaq Davis, New Orleans Saints out of South Carolina State. And this is very notable. He signed for $216,000. He got the bag. Okay, so I guess maybe it is better to be undrafted free agent because he got the bag and he's going to a team that might be pretty good in the NFC South. So Arielle, based off what we're seeing from the players that were picked up in undrafted free agency, or what I'll call the 8th round, okay? Like, which players do you think are going to be the most impactful for the teams that they were picked up by?
I can definitely say Mark Evans is going to be, I was hoping that he was going to be a first round pick, but Mark Evans, I'm super, super excited to see. Isaiah Land, I'm super, super excited to see. I never thought I would say this because he was on my list, but he wasn't like somebody big on my list. Kamari Everett. And it's funny because there were a lot of tight ends and offensive tackles that got taken out this draft. Tight ends are really big and they're notable this year. So to see him pulled off, that kind of amazes me. But between Isaiah Lynn and Mark Evans, the two only invited to the NFL Combine and still had to go undrafted. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why invite them and you're not going to pick them anyway? But those two, the most talked about, I'm super excited about. I wish more wide receivers, because the HBCUs, they have a big wide receiving class. I wish more would have gone off, but congratulations to those that were taken. But those two, probably my top favorite, and I cannot wait to see hit the field.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Like, we have to really start calling undrafted free agency the 8th round, because there were some guys that were getting picked up before the draft was even over. Like, I was thinking, we got a second player, and he just got signed as undrafted free agent. So we got to just start calling that the 8th round, because I just don't understand how you have all these talented players that really should have been picked up in the draft. But I want to bring back up what I talked about last episode. And I wondered if maybe the undrafted free agency lane is better for HBCU players. And before we got on, as I said, we're recording this on Sunday, Bomani Jones, who I'm a big fan of, Game Theory on HBO, he's an ESPN personality. He also went to Clark Atlanta, very intelligent. He tweeted out a thread, and I want to read what he said, and I want to revisit the topic of after what happened this year, if undrafted free agency is the lane. He said, if I'm a 7th round pick, I'd rather go undrafted and pick my team. So if we're talking about guys who should have gone in the 3rd or 4th round and didn't get drafted, there's a problem. If it's fringe guys, the honor of being undrafted ain't that functionally important. I can criticize the NFL for a lot of things, but they've demonstrated they'll take on-field talent from wherever they find it. And he said, because he's very, very critical of Deion Sanders, and before you try it, this isn't a knock on Deion. This is me wondering why anyone thinks more HBCU players should have been drafted. I don't know the landscape well enough to speak on it, but the issue here isn't clearly defined to me. So I think that what we're seeing right here is Bomani Jones. He's openly musing, but he's saying, well, isn't it sort of more fly to become an undrafted free agent and then in this free market to pick your team? So Arielle, after hearing that and also seeing what happened this weekend, do you think it's maybe a little bit more fly and we maybe should look for more of the players that are picked up in undrafted free agency or that get training camp invites?
I mean, it's not the way that I would want to go, but it seems like the only way to go. It's not like it's the best way. The best way is to get more than 2 HBCU players invited to the NFL Combine, to get more than 1 player drafted in the past year. But it just seems like you're just going to have to push. Go to the training camps, get the invitations, sign to their practice squad, and work your way up. It's not the best decision, but to create this kind of impact and to get people to realize, hey, if we just would have got him first, maybe it would have won us the Super Bowl. You see these past 2 Super Bowl teams both had 2 HBCU players on their team. So it's not like we can't help you, and it's not like we aren't talented. But if you really want it as an HBCU player, I say right now, this is the only chance that you have. Not your best chance, but the only chance that you have to make an impact.
Going back to the Bomani Jones point, is that the reason why you want to get drafted is because it's prestigious. To say that a team wanted me so badly that they're going to use draft capital to get me, and ESPN is going to spotlight me, and NFL Network is going to spotlight me, I'm going to be etched in that history. The same history that Jerry Rice was a part of. The same history that Ed Too Tall Jones, being the first overall pick, is a part of. You know, the same history that Steve McNair is a part of. Like, it's prestigious to say I was drafted. Now, yes, you have folks like Ryan Clark that went out there and they were great in their career and they weren't drafted. You had folks like Tom Brady that were drafted in lower rounds that some consider the GOAT. He just might be. He wasn't the first round pick. He wasn't the number 1 pick, but he was impactful. There's a lot of talent coming out of these institutions all around college football, but it's just something about hearing your name called. It's something about saying, I was drafted by the Falcons. I was drafted by the Texans. I was the number 1 pick. Look at how some of those guys were up there, how they were acting. Like Jatir Carter, who I thought the Falcons would get. I thought it was a slam dunk. I thought he was going to get picked by the Falcons. And you saw him get picked by the Eagles. And I looked at his expression. There's a lot that went into that. But he was so happy. And that made me happy because that's the dream. So to me, I think that that's the reason why the draft is valuable, because that's the dream being lived out. But what do you think will happen next year? Like, do you think that there are going to be some players that are going to hop in the portal because they want to get drafted? Do you think that maybe because of the talent that's coming out next year that you're going to see more HBCU players that get drafted, or even the outrage that we're showing? Do you think that more HBCU players will get drafted? Like, what do you think is going to happen this next year?
I think this kind of puts a dent into our efforts just because of how ridiculous it was to only have 1 player drafted. But I also think it's going to put into perspective of how much more we have to try. I think a lot of players are probably going to take the route after this year to do undrafted free agency and just see the best deal that they could get there, which, you know, I hate it for them. You don't ever want your dreams to be crushed. I think we might see a decrease and players that declare to go to the draft. We'll still see faces. Will it be a lot? No. But I think after this year, a lot of athletes may take the undrafted route, and it just, you know, might be better for them. I hate it, but it might be better.
But we're going to end on that, Arielle. Where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at @AskRiri__, or you can follow me on my website at theunackedopinion.weebly.com.
You're listening to Randall's Thoughts on HBCU Pulse Radio.
Yeah, so on today's Randall's Thoughts, and impromptu Randall's Thoughts, I might add, I have to give my opinion on what Shannon Sharpe said about only 1 HBCU player being drafted in this year's 2023 NFL Draft and his shocking disagreement with Deion Sanders. Check out what he said on Undisputed.
Who are the players that should have been drafted from the HBCUs?
Okay.
And what round should they have been drafted in?
All right.
Skip, this is not affirmative action. I'm going to disagree with Prime on this one. I believe if the guys were talented enough to get drafted, I believe they would have gotten drafted.
Okay, so bear with me because Shannon Sharpe's response was sort of convoluted, I must admit. So let's address his first point. Who do we think should have been drafted? Well, right here I have a list. Aubrey Miller, Isaiah Land, Darius Hagans, Dejon Nugget Warren, Andrew Farmer, Mark Evans, Shaq Davis. There are literally 17 HBCU prospects that were signed as undrafted free agents directly after the draft. All these 17 guys had talent enough to be drafted. And I'm not saying they should have been the number one pick, but you're telling me they could have been picked in the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th round? You're telling me that the 3 prospects that Deion Sanders referenced in his tweet, which were Aubrey Miller, Dallas Daniels, and Dejon Nugget Warren, who weren't taken, you're telling me that they're not talented enough to be drafted? So now, Shannon Sharpe, because of your inferiority complex about HBCUs, in which you're a Savannah State alumnus, you're telling me that your inferiority complex is now causing yourself to say, well, Deion Sanders didn't coach him well enough. They weren't talented enough to get drafted. Deion Sanders must have did something wrong. That is what you're saying, Shannon Sharpe. At this point, I think it's time we stop taking Shannon Sharpe's HBCU take seriously, because he's not putting the homework in enough to be a true advocate of HBCUs on television. This is the man that said he went to an HBCU only because he was Prop 48, which means that he had bad grades. And if he had better grades, he would have gone to another institution. Shannon Sharpe has a clear inferiority complex about HBCUs, and he's not well-versed enough to have this conversation. It makes me so upset, because these are the folks that are on TV, that are on social media, that people take seriously when it comes to HBCU topics. Meanwhile, folks like me that aren't celebrities with a TV show or millions of followers on social media or hundreds of thousands or millions of YouTube subscribers that advocate for HBCUs and speak the truth about HBCUs, good or bad, and that work to uplift HBCUs, we're not listened to, and we're even ridiculed when HBCU topics come up. Oh, you're an HBCU graduate. You don't know what you're talking about. You're biased. Why can I assure you of this much, Shannon Sharpe? As someone that watched HBCU football intently and saw the prospects that were on the draft board and saw Isaiah Bolden play and saw all of the players that were signed as undrafted free agents, I can assure you, sir, that you're wrong. You are out of your depth. You don't know what you're talking about. I think his comments say a lot about where his mindset and mentality is, because he clearly has an inferiority complex when it comes to HBCUs. Just because you are a celebrity and went to an HBCU doesn't mean you're an advocate for all of us. And honestly, these celebrities that did go to HBCUs with the large platforms that they have, they need to be careful about what they say. As HBCU students, alumni, and advocates, we always have an uphill battle to fight for the sustainability and viability of our institutions when we're always under attack in the media and on social media. Every time Shannon Sharpe and other celebrities speak uninformed about HBCUs, they're helping the bad faith actors that are attacking HBCUs and saying we're inferior. So I need for Shannon Sharpe and the celebrities such as Shannon Sharpe that want to speak on HBCUs and advocate for HBCUs to do their homework, because you're failing to hold it down for us. And that's just my thoughts on today. Of course, you can follow HBCU Pulse on Instagram and YouTube at HBCU Pulse, Twitter and TikTok, the HBCU Pulse, and subscribe to HBCU Pulse Radio wherever you get your podcast. You can donate to us at paypal.me/HBCU Pulse or cash up us at $HBCU Pulse. But outside of that, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, we'll see you on the other side, and we'll talk to you next week.
Like what you hear?
Yeah.
Subscribe to HBCU Pulse Radio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head to HBCUPulse.com to stay up to date on what's going on in the HBCU community. Thank you for listening to HBCU Pulse Radio.